Welcome, everyone. I am Adesewa Josh, and this is Africa Matters. This week, we focus on the U.S.-Africa Summit as Washington battles for influence and aims to revive relations with the African continent.
I do not expect the Nigerian military to do that. I have absolute confidence in the Nigerian military.
Nigeria's humanitarian minister rejects a Reuters report accusing the military of performing secret abortions on girls rescued from Boko Haram captivity. And it's heartbreak and pride as Morocco's World Cup dream comes to an end after making history by becoming the first Afro-Arab nation to reach the semi-finals. U.S. President Joe Biden is seeking to rekindle America's relationship with the African continent at the U.S.-Africa Summit in Washington, D.C. The U.S. influence waned during Donald Trump's presidency, which shifted its focus to domestic rather than foreign policy. But China and Russia have been filling the vacuum since the last summit 8 years ago. Beijing is now Africa's biggest lender and trading partner, with exports from both sides worth about $254 billion last year, while Russia has been rallying support as the war on Ukraine continues. During his meeting with the 49 heads of states and leaders of the African Union, President Biden announced new trade and development projects worth $55 billion over the next 3 years, including $100 million for clean energy. Leon Lakane reports from Washington, D.C.
This is the picture the White House was eager to paint. Nearly 50 African leaders, together with the President of the United States. It's been 8 years since the last U.S.-Africa summit, and Washington's been criticized for its lack of commitment to the continent. But this White House is trying to change that message.
I'm looking forward to hearing more from all of you about the issues and priorities that matter most to Africa, and how we can deepen our cooperation.
The president also put his backing behind Africa on the world stage.
That the United States fully supports reforming the UN Security Council to include permanent representation for Africa. And today I'm also calling for the African Union to join the G20 as a permanent member of the G20.
And there was no holding back on the pageantry, with the U.S. president hosting the leaders at a White House dinner, where he honored America's African diaspora and its descendants, including the millions of people who were enslaved.
We remember the stolen men and women and children who were brought to our shores in chains, subjected to unimaginable cruelty.
Over the course of the 3-day summit, delegates discussed issues like the climate crisis, food security, and good governance. Leaders also cemented billions of dollars in trade deals and investments. But with Russia and China growing their influence on the continent, there was another underlying message. Washington is a better partner for Africa.
Regarding Russia and China, they're not always transparent in terms of what they're doing, and that creates problems that will be eventually destabilizing if they're not already.
So the summit's over with many pledges made. Now it's time for action. The U.S. president is dispatching some of his top advisors to Africa to see through the promises, even planning a visit himself.
Let's hear more from Uche Igwe, a visiting fellow, London School of Economics. He joins me from Abuja, Nigeria. Thank you so much for making the time. What is Washington hoping to achieve with the summit, and will they get it?
Well, I think that as you highlighted in the preliminaries, I think that Washington is seeking to expand their influence in Africa, especially as you know, the war in Ukraine is raging and China is in competition, and they have expanded their influence both in trade and in all forms of support, especially in infrastructure to the continent. So yes, Washington is seeking to do the needful, and that is to seek to show up their influence and probably counter that of China and Russia that is going at the moment.
But then again, some people would say, I mean, according to Afrobarometer, the U.S. is still the much preferred power on the continent. But what informed Washington's decision to want to expand, as you've put it earlier?
Well, I think that there's been a whole lot of concern about the approach of other powers. For instance, the United States government under Joe Biden launched the first anti-corruption strategy, and the sort of approach that the United States have used traditionally is to sort of try to promote transparency and accountability, and then also promote issues of climate change. And as you know, these other countries are not necessarily doing the same. So it is unsurprising that the United States is preferred, probably because of their methodology. But again, it is up to other partners to begin to try to make sure that they, as much as possible, go towards adopting climate change strategies and also transparency-related strategies. So it's a competition.
Yeah, the margin between China and the U.S. in terms of preferability on the continent is just 2% if you look at it. But what do you think African governments want from this? What should they be asking for?
I think that Africa should go on the table with their own needs. For instance, insecurity is a big issue. The infrastructural gap is still so huge. And terrorism in a country like Nigeria and so many parts of Africa, terrorism is on the increase. And again, also, you will recall that there is a global push for energy transition. Africa need to articulate their own needs. There are conversations about using gas as a transition fuel. And as you know, so many African countries are rich in oil and gas. And the conversation is, are we going to leapfrog into the energy transition era, or are we going to bring up our interests on the table such that Africa benefits from their God-given resources and slowly and systematically transit to renewable energies?
Do you think Biden's pivot towards Africa would outlast his administration? We all know what happened during the Trump's administration. And how his administration approached foreign policy, especially towards Africa?
Well, I think that it is an institutional thing. I was in Washington a few days ago during the International Anti-Corruption Conference, and you sort of get a feeling that not only the Biden's administration, they are also attuning their institutions to deeper partnership with African nations. And as you know, this is not only support, it is also as a result of their interest in pushing their influence geopolitically, especially in the midst of strong and intense competition from China and Russia. So yes, it is in the interest of Africa. Also, it is in the interest of the United States to push this interest during and beyond the Biden administration.
So in August, the Biden administration unveiled a new strategy towards Africa. What's new about that strategy? Talk to us about it. What's new about this approach? Is it really new?
Well, there are several dimensions to it. As you know, during the Trump administration, the focus was, so much of, internal approach to issues. Their external, especially the African strategy, was weak. I wouldn't say this is new, but I think it is a renewal, as it were, because after the years of Trump, it was important that a deliberate effort is made to sort of reassert the United States' position globally and then show up their influence.
And finally, before I let you go, if that happens, if the U.S. steps up, how do you see this change the geopolitics, between these three powers on the continent? And what should Africans continue to look at while these three people play?
Well, I think that African countries should continue to focus on one thing and one thing alone, and that is their interest. The African interest, how does all of these play benefit the African continent, especially in areas of need? Like I said, the infrastructural gap is huge, and how can leveraging on these opportunities from these competing powers, how can we sort of reduce the gap? And again, insecurity is becoming a huge issue. Again, I referred to Nigeria, in Mozambique, and many other countries where insurgency and terrorism is growing. Again, how can Africa leverage on the security infrastructure and security support offered by these competing powers to ensure that Africa is more secure? Because if we're talking about Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement to boost trade, even within the continent, security is an important issue.
Right, it is indeed.
So I think that it is on the table of Africa to articulate their own interest in these three directions and more, again, including transparently exploring and exploiting our mineral resources for sustainable development.
Thank you so much.
Get maximum benefit. Yes.
Uche Igwe, a visiting fellow, London School of Economics, thank you so much for speaking to Africa Matters. Still to come on Africa Matters.
I'm Daniel Plafker in Mombasa, Kenya, and I'll explain how the arrival of grain ships from war-torn Ukraine might take the edge off East Africa's emerging hunger crisis.
I'm Timothy Obiezu in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, where the central bank has rolled out new currency notes and put a cap on cash withdrawals.
Morocco's Atlas Lions have made history by becoming the first Afro-Arab team to reach a World Cup semi-finals. But their dream of lifting the trophy was cut short by the defending champions France on Wednesday. This World Cup was also the first time that all of the African teams that qualified had African coaches. But while there was understandably disappointment back home, fans were also filled with pride, as Sana Kalada reports from Rabat.
We are very proud and happy to have such a team that proved its great achievement along the FIFA World Cup 2022.
Our feeling is a mixture of happiness and sadness, but we are happy that our team could reach the final.
I would like to extend my thanks to Walid Regragui and to the Moroccan team players. Bravo for such a great and wonderful performance. You really honored Moroccan and Arab and African football.
Hard luck. It's not a problem. We lost the match, but it's okay. We made it a long way. The match was an exciting one.
The match was nice. It's a victory to reach to the semi-finals. It adds value to the country, as it's been a long time since we reached the finals.
Everybody is happy and proud and honored to have the Atlas Lions for their great achievement, performance. It's not really the end of the world if we couldn't make it this time, but everybody is happy for the great achievement of the Moroccan team.
A Reuters investigation this month alleged that the Nigerian military conducted a secret abortion program on young girls rescued from Boko Haram captivity. The report claimed that the Nigerian military illegally terminated at least 10,000 pregnancies since 2013 without the women's consent, according to witness testimony. It added that the majority of the victims were young girls raped by members of the militant group Boko Haram. And on the sidelines of the TRT World Forum in Istanbul, I began by asking Nigeria's Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Sadiya Umar Farouk, for her response to the report.
I do not expect the Nigerian military to do that. I have absolute confidence in the Nigerian military, and we're working hand in hand to address these issues. That has not come to us as a ministry officially. We also heard the report, and I'm sure the Nigerian military has responded in debunking that allegation. And I want to stress and re-stress that our military is very competent. Our military is very humane, because even the military provide humanitarian support to these internally displaced persons or people who have been rescued from the Boko Haram captivity. And we provide psychosocial support hand in hand together with the military to these people who have been rescued. And I'm sure an investigation has started already to that effect, and we are waiting to see the outcome of that investigation.
Staying in Nigeria, as banks have begun issuing a newly designed currency, the central bank changed the country's highest denominations in a bid to curb excess hoarding of cash, prevent counterfeiting and crimes, and promote more cashless payments. It also announced a limit on cash withdrawals and said Nigerians have until the end of January to exchange old currency notes for new ones. But as Timothy Obiezu reports from Abuja, some people say the new currency could come with big costs.
For 12 years, Nnamdi Okwuma has grown his business by mostly trading with large volumes of cash. But under a new central bank directive starting January the 9th, individuals can only withdraw 100,000 naira or $225 every week, while companies are allowed to withdraw just over $1,000 weekly. The policy is to rein in on excess cash in circulation, curb inflation, prevent counterfeiting, and discourage the payment of ransoms to kidnappers who demand cash. But like many, Okwuma says it could stifle his business.
If I'm going to market to go and buy one or two things, it's not something of 100,000 or 500,000. I buy things of that worth $1 million. I don't know how I manage it, but for me, it makes things to work harder to people that are corrupt. But we, the businessmen, it's not helping us so much.
A monthly withdrawal above the specified limits can be made, but that attracts a mandatory 5 or 10% processing fees for individual accounts and corporate entities, respectively. The central bank says the old and new 200, 500 and 1,000 naira bills will run concurrently until the end of January, when the old notes cease to be legal tender.
This is Nigeria's first currency change in 2 decades. Authorities are hoping the move could recall up to $6 billion, or more than 85% of monies in circulation, back into the banking system. But many people here say the changeover time is way too short.
But finance analysts say the new central bank policies have long-term benefits for Nigeria's economy.
Excess of cash in the circulation is one of the drivers of inflation. In fact, drivers of galloping inflation. So we are saying that the policy will mean a lot in terms of helping to restructure and reposition the economy to a certain degree.
But others say exchanging the old tender for the new will especially be hard for Nigerians in rural areas who can't get to a bank, and unless the central bank changes its timetable, around 40% of Nigerians could lose their life savings when the old notes expire in January. Timothy Obiezu, Africa Matters, Abuja, Nigeria.
South Africa's ruling African National Congress is holding its elective conference where members will decide who will lead the party for the next 5 years. Incumbent President Cyril Ramaphosa is up against a former cabinet minister, Zweli Mkhize. The vote is viewed by many as a test of the Ramaphosa presidency. But as Crystal Alderson reports, for ordinary South Africans, the high unemployment rate and crippling power cuts are foremost on their minds.
Keeping himself looking neat for work is important for 45-year-old Jack Molekwa. He considers himself lucky to be able to afford a visit to this makeshift barbershop. With more than 7 million people unemployed, Jack knows he's lucky to have a job too. The father of two says 1994, when South Africa held its first democratic elections, was a year of excitement and hope for the African National Congress. But 27 years later, he is worried about how the ANC is running the country.
The politicians are doing some things that we don't understand. They do the things, they're taking money themselves. You can see South Africa now is rotten. We don't have a job, we don't have anything.
Corruption scandals have been a feature of South African politics for decades, but the latest has cut deep. It involves President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was elected on an anti-corruption ticket. He's accused of covering up the theft of more than $500,000 from his farm in the north of the country. A panel looking into the matter found that President Ramaphosa had a prima facie case to answer over a serious violation of the Constitution and his oath of office. Ramaphosa has since challenged this finding, calling it a flawed report, and he claims he is innocent. Opposition parties called for Ramaphosa's impeachment and resignation, but ANC lawmakers who hold a majority in parliament voted against it. And Ramaphosa is expected to be re-elected as leader at the party's upcoming conference. But political analyst Ibrahim Fakir says the ANC is divided.
Well, I think the ANC goes into this conference more divided than it has ever been as a political party and as an organization. But historically, over the last 15 years, every conference that the ANC has gone into, the rifts have got wider and wider.
Despite detractors calling for his head, Fakir says Ramaphosa remains the best choice as leader of the party and can still command respect from international investors.
Hopefully, in the second term, he will choose to adopt stringent changes which are required, even if they come at the cost of hurting the ANC, though they may benefit the country. And the problem is that what benefits the ANC is no longer synonymous with what benefits the country.
Despite high food and petrol prices, Jack Molekwa hopes the next 5 years will see positive change in the country. Crystal Alderson, Africa Matters, Johannesburg.
To Kenya now, where Ukrainian grain ships are finally arriving at East African ports. They're sailing as part of the Black Sea Corridor Agreement brokered by Turkey and the UN. The resumption of the trade is bringing much-needed relief to a region in the grip of a historic drought. Daniel Pafka reports from the port city of Mombasa.
At the World Food Programme warehouse in Mombasa, staff are taking careful stock of vital supplies. The Kenyan port city is among East Africa's top entry points for overseas grain. This year alone has seen the UN body move more than 250,000 tons of food through the harbor. But in a region grappling with record high grain prices and its worst drought in 4 decades, it still doesn't seem to be enough.
In Kenya alone, we have 4.4 million people that are facing acute hunger. Ukraine previously was our largest sourcing center for agriculture, commodities, and oil seeds. It's very important for the World Food Programme to have access to these food items, especially given the drought, the ongoing drought and the food crisis that exists in Eastern Africa.
But access to Ukraine was abruptly cut short after Russia's attack in February. Now, after months of blockaded trade routes, a Turkish brokered agreement between Russia, Ukraine, and the United Nations is seeing grain from Black Sea ports finally flowing into East African silos once again.
Under this initiative, already was dispatched around 13,300,000 metric tons of grain, wheat, sunflower oil, and other foodstuff around the world. Apart of Kenya, this grain will be sent to Ethiopia, Yemen, Sudan, and Nigeria.
Here in Mombasa, over 100,000 tons of Ukrainian wheat have already been unloaded under the initiative, with still more ships on the way. The food will bring much-needed relief to increasingly hungry communities here in Kenya and in nearby landlocked nations as well. For traders at this nearby marketplace, it's relief that can't come soon enough. Filipina Wandoe has sold cereals at this stall for over 30 years. She says the ongoing drought has sent wheat prices soaring.
To tell the truth, the price of wheat has really climbed in accordance with the state of the economy. The rain has been very little. Last year it was 65 cents per kilo, now it's almost $1.
The flow of grain from Ukraine to African ports is expected to continue, with President Volodymyr Zelensky promising late last month to deliver enough humanitarian food aid to feed 5 million people by mid-next year. But until the continent becomes self-sufficient in its cereal production, the fate of Filipina and many more like her will continue to depend on the turbulent outcomes of faraway battlefronts. Daniel Plafker, Africa Matters, Mombasa.
And finally this week, we explore Robertsport, an Atlantic port in western Liberia. The coastal town is popular with surfers looking for the perfect wave and its long stretches of sandy beach. Let's take a look. That's our show for this week. Please share your thoughts and suggestions about the stories you've seen on this episode or ideas on what you would like us to cover on Twitter using the hashtag #AfricaMatters. Feel free to reach out to me and my personal handle at Adesewa Josh. You can watch this episode and more on YouTube. Just search Africa Matters TRT World. Like, comment, and share. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next week.